Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. I'm Adam Huss, coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Thanks so much for listening. The sponsor for this episode is Catavino Tours. Catavino Tours provides luxury travel, wine, and food tours in Portugal and Spain, and they are guided by a desire to reduce the ecological impact that travel can have by reducing waste, encouraging fewer and more meaningful trips, and by using well-vetted carbon offsets. They are currently booking at catavinotours.com/OWP for Organic Wine Podcast for a fall sustainable and natural wine harvest tour. If you're considering a wine tour in Portugal and Spain and want to have that experience be more meaningful and conducted by a company who is thoughtful about their ecological impact, check out Catavino Tours by going to catavinotours.com/OWP. That's CATAVINO tours.com/OWP for Organic Wine Podcast. And your tour will not only benefit you, but this podcast as well. I'll list that link in the show notes. Thank you for being thoughtful about your travel. My guest for this episode is Hoss Hauksson, and he practices a form of viticulture in Switzerland that integrates elements of vitiforestry or a silvoculture polyculture using a biodynamic approach with the world's smallest sheep and technologies like drone spraying and UV robots. His wine takes the idea of terroir literally, incorporating medicinal and aromatic herbs and trees as infusions in both the vineyard ecosystem and his pinot noir. In other words, I think I discovered my long-lost soul twin. Hoss is one of the only, if not the one and only, Icelandic winemakers on Earth, which means he's probably related to Steve Matthiasson. And he tells us about his journey from wanting to be, quote, the hero winemaker to a focus on just becoming a good farmer. Hoss's holistic ecological view of fostering a healthy farm ecosystem from which the best, most interesting wine can be made leads us from some really important discussion about the soil microbiome through to expressing terroir by making a pet-nat infused with wormwood, hyssop, and yarrow. Along the way, we find out the importance of promoting a fungal-dominant soil that recreates the forest floor from which vines evolved, how he uses different trees and herbs for different purposes in and around the vines, and how his adorable miniature sheep are vital to the entire ecosystem. Fertile nuggets of information, rich with wisdom, are scattered everywhere throughout this interview like sheep poop in a vineyard orchard. You're in for a treat. Enjoy. Oh, and I should mention that the audio is a bit quiet for several reasons, so you may need to turn the volume up to hear this well. Hi, Hoss. Welcome. Thanks for joining the podcast and doing this interview.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, could you tell where you are and, introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, my name is Hoss Hauksson. I live in Switzerland. I'm born and raised in Iceland, and then I left Iceland to go to California for 4 years in '94. It was, I guess. I've
Uh-oh,
been
we have a
traveling since,
California
and
connection.
I've now been living in Switzerland since 2009. My
Where were
wife
you
is
in
Swiss.
California, just out of curiosity?
Say what again?
Where were you in California? Did you say California?
Yeah, I was at UCSB studying mathematics.
Oh, fantastic.
Got to visit some nice wineries up there, and yeah, so it was quite nice.
Lovely. Yeah, UCSB that's kind of my neck of the woods. It's where I get grapes from that area, or I have in the past gotten
Yeah.
some grapes from Santa Barbara County.
Okay.
I hate to do this to you but, and maybe it's putting you on the spot and you can refuse to answer, but since you're one of the first international guests I've had
Yeah.
who actually has been here and spent some time in the U.S., especially in California,
Yeah.
did you have any impressions of us crazy Americans that you'd like to share?
No, I really enjoyed my time.
That's fantastic.
What I had a couple of people that were always sort of talking about, un-Americans speaking about, us crazy Americans. I usually find the variation within a nation is much greater than the variation between sort of the averages of nations. If you see what I mean?
Yes, yeah, that does
People
make a
have
lot
this
of
image
sense.
that they are very special, both in terms of how crazy they are and stuff. So it tends to be overblown, in my opinion.
Oh, that's very well said. Well, it also sounds like you have a more well-rounded view of humanity as well, not an oversimplified view or perspective. It sounds like.
I've lived in a number of countries. I spent 7 years in London, been in Switzerland now for quite a few years. So I've seen a bit.
Okay. Well, where are you now? I mean, you are in Switzerland, but where can you talk about where you are and what you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm a winemaker. I spent my first career was in finance for 20 years. And then 2017, I cut my tie off, so to speak, and bought a farm. And I took over one farm in 2017, the second one 2019. They're very close by each other. They're sort of near the border with Germany. It's in a canton called Aargau.
Okay.
And then I also have a few parcels down in the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland. Total area is about 15 acres, I guess. I'm trying to convert everything
Okay.
here to US measures.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, feel free to say hectares too. I'm sure there are. I know there are international listeners as well, or non-American listeners, I should say, since we're all international to each other. But so it sounds like a bunch of little parcels, then, theoretically.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's a mosaic that has sort of grown over time. The both farms that I took over, they're sort of the life work of somebody that has created both the patchwork in terms of parcels, but also in terms of varieties.
Oh, nice. And
Um, yeah, go
did
ahead.
you intend to become a winemaker, or did buying the land, the farms, turn you into one?
Well, no, when I took over the farm, I was intending to become a winemaker. I mean, the adventure actually started a little bit earlier, so
Yeah, please. That's
to,
what I guess what I'm getting at is how did you
so
end
I,
up doing this?
yeah, wine just became a hobby, and I bought my first ton of Pinot Noir grapes in 2014,
Okay.
and I made wine in the laundry room at home.
With a ton. That's a big laundry room.
It didn't feel so big at the time, but it just barely fit.
Yeah.
But it was quite nice, a
So
couple of
would
still
you have
tanks,
two
a couple
barrels in
of couple
there?
of barrels, and
Yeah, a couple barrels in the laundry room. I love it.
yeah, and a tiny little pump and a tiny little press, and yeah, so it sort of worked.
Nice. Yeah, how'd the wine turn out?
It was actually quite good. It was actually good.
Oh,
It was a difficult vintage. It was difficult to get the ripeness. So what I actually
oh
ended
yeah.
up doing was to take about 10% of the grapes and took it to my father-in-law, who he has a little hut attached to his house where he dries apples and pears
Uh-huh.
in a wood-fired. So there's sort of like a wood-fired chamber
Yeah.
below, and then a separate chamber above, um, where he dries the apples and pears. And I dried 10% of the grapes, and it turned out quite nice.
Not concentrated that to it rather than like capitalizing. It's a sort of you did the other you removed water
Yeah, I
rather
removed
than
water.
add sugar.
Yeah, but it's sort of interesting because it's sort of hot drying, right? It's not the same as when you do like an Amarone where you just hang them up and let them dry at atmospheric temperatures.
Right.
Because at I think it's around 80 degrees centigrades, then fructose starts to caramelize.
Right.
So it actually
Interesting.
ended up being quite interesting. But
Oh.
yeah, those bottles are all gone now.
Sort of like a Maillard reaction, is that what it's called? The like when you start to get that like almost a caramelization?
I think so. I think there's a little bit of caramelization on the fructose, not on the glucose.
Got it. Yeah. Interesting. That would be fun. Have
Yeah,
you employed that since? Is that like a technique that you accidentally discovered and now you are using regularly or anything?
no. This was in my sort of wild days when I was experimenting with everything. First when I started, I was really you start reading these glossy brochures from the producers of all the additives you can put in, and every
Right.
additive just sounds so fabulous. You're like, oh, I gotta have some of that.
Yep.
So, like in my
Yep.
first year, I think I put 3 or 4 different types of yeast in the same tank. I was like,
Right. Right. Yeah.
but uh, but I've really come around completely, and so like our 2021 bottling is 00.
Gotcha.
And since then we're aiming for 0-0 when possible. But if it's not going our way, then we'll make corrections.
Yes. Yeah. That sounds very sane and lovely. Um,
Yeah, it's been a real learning process. I mean, you sort of, all the products that just sound so great, but then
yes.
you try them out, and it's like, well, it's just not what I was looking for.
And did you have any mentors or anybody that helped you or guided you in that path initially, or was it just reading and watching videos and things like that?
I was just reading and experimenting.
Yeah. So
And it
that's
was
good.
actually a
That's
great setting because, in these first 3 years, 14, 15, 16, it was always small volume. So, and it was just a hobby on the side. So if a tank actually went bad, I could just pour it down the drain and it'd be okay.
right. Right.
But then starting in 2017, it wasn't the case anymore. And that made for a couple of sort of stressful nights, but it worked all
Got,
right.
right. Right. Um, yeah, it's funny. I very similar, start. It's weird how you get started that way. And maybe that was the time. I mean, maybe, a young winemaker starting now would have more exposure to like a hands-off experience. I don't know. I'd be curious to know about that. But I know, like, yeah, you get the glossy brochures, and I mean, I even had, the sort of step-by-step recipes to follow, that I found and that other people gave me, and then yeah, it's sort of finding your way free of that. But you also are doing some pretty fun stuff with the farming that you're doing there,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I would love to jump into that. I know you say it's almost like a vitiforestry, silvo-vitiforestry kind of approach that you're trying. Can
yeah,
you sort of introduce that?
yeah, yeah. I mean, the focus has definitely shifted completely from wanting to be sort of the hero winemaker to just becoming a farmer, and the farming is really the absolute center of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Um, Gosh, there's so
So
many
yeah,
angles
so
to
I
this.
mean, let's talk. You integrate some cute little sheep. It sounds like into your vineyards year
Yeah,
round. If I'm
yeah,
not right, what can you describe those sheep and how they're interacting?
yeah. So it's a breed called Ouessant. So Ouessant. It
Uh huh.
comes from an island called Ouessant in France.
Okay.
Um, and as far as I know, it's the smallest breed of sheep in the world.
Okay.
So
That's a
they're actually
little.
quite convenient for integrating into vineyards. We
They
work.
sound adorable too.
Oh, they're a lot of fun. They're so much fun. Um, we work biodynamically. Now, I
Okay.
understand that in the US, if you are organic, you are not allowed to have any animals in the vineyards 3 months prior to harvest. But
So
that does
that
not apply for us.
right, and I think that has changed in the U.S. Just I think that was true for a while, and
Oh, okay.
I recently interviewed um, Kelly Mulville, who you may or may not know, who has sort of pioneered the year-round system for having year-round grazing in vineyards here in California and elsewhere. And he's one of the pioneers, but he's done a lot of work with it, and he was able to petition, and with the help of actually somebody who worked for the organic certifier, at least in California, they were able to overcome that stipulation based on precedent, the fact that there's never been any cases of pathogens being transferred from
Yeah.
animals to grapes in the vineyard,
Mhm.
and especially in his system where the vines are trellised up high. And I mean, I don't even know if it matters about that much, but I think there's a precedent set now where it has been allowed year
Is that
round.
is
So
that is that from Paysine's ranch?
that is, yeah,
Okay.
business, yeah.
Yeah, cool. So we actually have a trellis system that's it's not too dissimilar from what he has.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, do you want to talk
Um,
about that? Is that
Except that we have sort of two high wires that are
okay?
about a foot apart, sideways,
Okay.
and then one of them is the fruiting wire where we tie the cordon down, and then once the branches get tall enough, we tie them down onto the other wire.
Oh, interesting. So it's like a horizontal trellis almost.
It looks basically like a like an airplane wing.
Okay, fascinating.
And the grapes are hanging down between the two wires. And because the sheep are so small, it doesn't have to be terribly high up. So you're not
Okay,
working a lot sort of overhead. It's basically sort of, maybe chest height.
chest height.
So it's really a
Nice.
comfortable height to work in.
Oh, wow. This is very interesting for,
And
I think,
uh, and then I sort of, depending on which direction the main wind direction is, I always set it up so that the wind is blowing sort of into the wing, if you will. Because
okay, so
our,
into the,
our, our climate is much wetter. It's much more wet here, so I need something that dries up much quicker. So I think if
I was,
I was to do the same as sort of the double-sided one as the Patience ranch has, I think I would get too much humid air in the grape zone.
right. Yeah, it creates an umbrella effect that way versus you can have the cordon on the wind side, the windward side, so the grapes catch the breeze first, I imagine.
Yeah,
That's
and then
lovely. So they
the
get a
sheep
lot more
are
exposure to sun and air that way.
well. You can control the sun in the sense that you can pull leaves if you want.
Right.
But what's actually interesting with the system is that once the clusters start to get heavy, they start dropping down, and there's no wire below them, and there's no branches below them that they're sort of leaning against, or no other clusters, right? They're just sort of free in the air. And at the
Right.
same time, all the leaves naturally stretch up for the sunlight. So you get
Ah,
sort of a natural separation of the grape zone.
that makes a lot of sense.
So you don't need to do much leaf balling at all. And then,
Huh.
I mean, if you want more sunlight, you can do that with by pulling leaves. But like for the whites, uh, we will be pulling very little leaves at all.
Huh. That have you noticed? I mean, I don't know if you've experimented, but I know that leaving some of those lower leaves can, at depending on the timing of if you leave them on or when you pull them off, they can affect cluster formation as well as how much carbohydrates are being sent into those clusters because they're very close to
Hmm.
those clusters. Have you experimented with that or
No,
have
no,
any?
not yet.
Okay.
I have 1 year under my belt, sort of on the first. We did a we did 4 parcels to start with, and we,
Oh,
we have sort of
fantastic.
1 season done with it, so I don't
Right.
have a ton of experience.
Got it. Got it. And how so and the sheep are year round. So what's the are there times of year when the forage gets a little thin for them? Do you have a drier period there where you are?
Um, Normally we don't,
Do
but
you have
we
a
had a
snowy
super we
period?
had a super dry year, super dry June and July last year.
Yeah, I
So
heard
I
it was.
actually had to.
Did you guys have to deal with the heat or are you high enough up?
We don't get that much heat. I
How
mean,
high
it's
are you?
not to the sense that it is a problem for the grapes. Typically,
What's your elevation?
we're at sort of 400 meters above sea level.
Okay, got it.
But normally I've got enough. I've got enough forage for them, and the thing is also because the grape zone is so high off the ground, it's okay if I have more grass. Like I don't have to mow it
Right,
that closely.
right. They can.
But it's fun with the sheep. They like to stand up on their hind legs and sort of climb up on things. And if they can't reach any leaves or things, that they will nibble on it for sure.
I know that they sometimes use each other to climb on, right?
I haven't observed mine do that, but a friend has a
Okay.
different breed called Skuten, and he laments how they sort of help each other out.
um, so
And
how are you integrating trees then into this system? What's the Vita silvoforestry part of this? Hey, I'm just jumping in to let you know about another incredible sponsor of the Organic Wine Podcast. They're called and they have solved a huge problem for the wine industry. That problem is the massive carbon footprint of using glass bottles. Collects used wine bottles, removes their labels, and cleans and sanitizes them so that they can be reused. At the same cost that you would pay for new bottles, you can now buy clean, reused bottles from and therefore also reduce your carbon footprint and reduced waste significantly. This is an industry-changing paradigm, and it's something you can share with your customers. It's a really big deal, both for wine and for the earth. And the earth is why is doing what they're doing. So check out at earth and enter the referral code OWP for Organic Wine Podcast in their contact form so that they know you heard it here. That's earth, OOM.earth, and use referral code OWP, and your bottle purchase will benefit the Organic Wine Podcast and the earth.
We are integrating, hazelnuts, walnuts, cherries, apples, pears, and service trees.
Okay.
We also have some sea buckthorn, hawthorns, wild roses. So the basic intuition is, the vine evolved over thousands of years, not, like a soldier in a row on the prairie, but rather at at a forest edge or in an opening in the forest where it was, with
Yeah.
the roots deeply in forest soil, and then climbing up a companion plant.
Right.
And
Very
then once it
symbiotic.
reached the top, it placed the grapes on the top, and the branches were then sort of drooping down. And that's sort of what I'm trying to create here. So that I do have the grapes on top and the branches drooping down. And then what I want to try to do is to create some sort of forest floor. And then if you think about it, like how would you do that? Like what does a forest floor look like?
Uh-huh.
I think the first observation is you never get much sunlight onto the forest floor.
Yes.
So if you think of sort of your classical VSP system, at midday, 80 to 90% of the energy is burning straight on the floor, on the
Right.
soil.
Right.
Whereas with the sort of horizontal system that I have, horizontal leaf, horizontal canopy, it's catching a lot of the sunlight. But then we're also including quite a lot of, or we're trying to build up a lot of herbs. I planted about 2,000 herbs, and you walk through my vineyards now and sort of look, so where are they? And you find a few of them.
Right. Right.
I'd need to put it, I don't know, tens of thousands.
Yeah.
But they will then also catch some of the sunlight. The trees will catch some of it, and we're also trying to leave as much dead wood as we can. So
Yeah.
this year we're experimenting with not chopping the branches, just leaving them on the ground.
That's
Any pruning from the trees, I intend to leave that on the ground with that, unchopped.
that's exactly what I'm doing in my backyard vineyard here in Los Angeles this year. It's this exact same thing. I did a big major pruning, and all of the branches just went straight whole. I mean, between the rows. And yeah, I'm very curious because I think the other thing in a forest floor, because of that lack of sunlight, it becomes a very fungal dominant soil, and
Yeah,
you could even potentially, rather than herbs, have like like mushroom crops growing
yeah.
in amongst the trees and vines. At that point, once you have canopy cover, and
And I mean, just like our immune system is to a large extent, in our gut. In the symbiosis we have with the gut microbiome that we have, it's the same with the plants.
yeah,
And the forest floor is 90% fungal dominated, whereas the prairie is sort of 50-50.
right,
So the vines that we're keeping today have a completely wrong immune system.
right,
Or if
right.
you think, or if you go to Burgundy, where when they're plowing the soils, many times a season, they are absolutely bacteria dominated.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really, I mean, they
This is
make fabulous wines, but it's
right,
somehow
right.
the
But
wrong immune system.
yeah, I mean, it's almost like, imagine what that wine could be if they actually were treating the soil better. It's like, it's so good, and yet they're abusing the soil, abusing the vine's relationship to the soil in a lot of ways. Yeah, I've thought about that as well.
And then also, if you think
Um,
of sort of how the economy in the soil works, right? I mean, the plant takes water, CO2, and sunlight and produces sugar, and then
right,
it exudes a large proportion of that sugar through the roots into the soil to feed the microbiome in order to
right,
build enough, mass there. And then the microorganisms use their enzymes to dissolve minerals and other, stuff out from the mineral world, make
Right.
them, complex them into organic compounds, and then make that available to the plant.
Right. The only way the geology becomes part of our wine is through the biology of the soil. Like we need a healthy biology in the soil if to express, these things that people think are, like if you just put a root next to a piece of limestone, that somehow changes it, but it doesn't. You need a mycorrhizal connection to that limestone.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah,
exactly.
that's that. I,
So it's
oh
got it's
God,
going
go
to
ahead.
have a. I'm expecting it to have a very big impact on the taste of the wine. I don't know what it's going to taste like because I haven't
Well,
found I haven't found anybody making wine that way. But it'll be fun.
this is my theory as well. I mean, I really think like yeah, right. Like I feel like it has to impact the taste, and then whether we feel like that is better or worse, I guess, might depend on a lot of different things. But, um, but I feel like it has to have an impact. Yeah, it seems, yeah, like for all the reasons that you're saying, it just makes sense. And yeah, going back to what you're saying, I've heard as much as 30% of its energy, the vine's energy, is spent exuding, giving energy, giving food to feed its soil partners.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and that's enormous. And I think like I often relate that as like an example for us and like how much energy and resources are we contributing to the things that sustain us as humans. And often we take a lot more than we give, I think.
yeah.
Um, and it's like I look to vines as these sort of wise ancient things that have been around since 65 million years ago, and maybe they know something we don't that we should pay attention to. Um,
But going back to the flavor, there is actually I found two pieces of research. One that showed that so the conclusion from the two of them was that basically the microbiology of the soil, there is a correlation with what kind of chemical components you can actually find in the final wine.
yeah.
So there is actually a scientific proof that it really has a direct impact.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I can that is a close correlation, although it didn't involve vines, is there's a book, What Your Food Ate, and I interviewed the authors for that. And
Hmm.
that whole thing is about how regenerative farming or non no till farming immediately changes the micronutrients in the food that is being grown in that soil versus a place that's being plowed and
Yeah,
herbicide used and things like that. It's like they can just show now there's conclusive data to show that you get far more micronutrients in a regenerative no-till system.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I mean that was no wine crops, but clearly there would be a direct correlation there.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
So how are you integrating these trees and shrubs and things with the vines? Like, are you? I mean, because you're talking about the trellising, are you just sort of planting them in amongst the trellised vines, like at the ends of the rows? Are you using any of the trees as trellis, as trellising posts or anything like that?
Um, we are trying a few different things. So
Got it.
one parcel I have is too vigorous. I think you call it the Vatnsville clone of it's a Pinot Noir clone, and it's just
Yes.
too
Yeah.
vigorous. And
Yeah.
what I did there was to plant a row of walnut trees at the top of the vineyard because I read somewhere that walnut trees were absolutely voracious nitrogen consumers,
Yes.
and that they
Yeah.
can suck up nitrogen from. So if you take the width of the canopy, they can suck up nitrogen from an area whose width is 6 to 8 times wider.
Wow. Wow.
So
Yeah. That.
my hope is to actually be able to slow that vineyard down a little bit, get it more into balance with walnut trees. Then in another parcel, we're planting hazelnuts directly into the rows,
Okay.
and there the aim is to use them as a climbing aid for the vines.
Great. Yeah, because they tend to be shrubby, so they won't. super outcompete, like a walnut, which will grow up, 50 feet or whatever. A hazelnut will maybe get to 10 feet.
Well, the thing is actually we have there's a special type of hazelnut. It's called Turkish hazelnut that grows like a tree. So you get the
Okay.
stem going up. If you take that
Okay.
stem up to maybe, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 feet height, and then you graft a regular hazelnut on top of that, that gives you good fruit or good
Okay.
nuts.
Yeah.
That's what we have. And then you'll get sort of like the shrub starting at 4 feet high.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And then you can coppice that, or pollard it whenever you feel that it's necessary, or when the branches get too long, you pollard that. And I aim to sort of tie the branches so that they grow into like a fan shape form, so it becomes a nice climbing aid.
Oh, perfect. So it doesn't, is that, is the fan perpendicular to the row or parallel to the row?
Parallel to the row,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
it's in the row, so it's going to be it'll,
Right. So you need to be able to pass it without whacking yourself in the head, kind
yeah,
of thing.
yeah.
Got it. And
And then cherries go outside the parcel
okay.
because we're picking them in sort of June while we're still spraying.
Okay.
Apples, I intend to plant that in the parcel because I can prune them as well to be small, and I can get small varieties that are on rootstocks that are sort of not very vigorous.
Right.
Pears tend to get bigger, however. Um,
Okay.
but so, but there I'm doing experiments with both. I have some that are in the parcel and some that are outside,
Gotcha.
and same with service tree.
Is there another name for service tree? I know there is. I can't remember what it is. What do we call
Uh,
that?
I
Maybe
only
it's
know the
not. Maybe
German
that's what it's
name.
called.
Uh, um,
Shadbush? I guess not. Maybe serviceberry is.
I think service berry might be something else, but this has a
Oh,
fruit
okay.
that is sort of like a small apple.
Yeah. Okay. I
So and
know
in
the
that but
name.
that parcel, that's a parcel that's a very thin layer of soil on top of a rock, piece of rock. So it's
Okay.
very it dries out super fast, and the service tree is very drought resistant. So we're using that to try to
Okay.
build the soil, build the water holding capacity, and also cast some shade. And in addition, we've added sea buckthorn in there, which is also very drought resistant. It
Right.
also tends to bind a little bit of nitrogen. So there's a very meager parcel, and we need to sort of build it up a little bit. So that way, so if you see sort of the difference between the service tree sea buckthorn parcel and the walnut parcel, that's how you can sort of use the trees to get a parcel more into balance if it's too vigorous or too little growth.
Got it. And the sea buckthorn, you were saying, essentially sequesters nitrogen. It's like a nitrogen fixer.
It's a nitrogen fixer.
Yeah.
And then aim to take the fruit from the service tree and from the sea buckthorn, and we'll make a sparkling cider out of that.
Nice. Love that.
And
Yeah, I know that sea buckthorn is considered medicinal to us in some, for some things.
it's super high in vitamin C.
Right. Lovely.
But it's funny to you were asking earlier about the sheep.
Yeah.
Um, so like I said, they like to stand up on their hind legs and nibble on things, and whenever I put them into a new parcel, it's like they have a sixth sense for which vines or which trees are weak, and they will immediately, be drawn to that plant and just sort of start rubbing against it, and you know, there's sort of this age-old fight between the landscape architects, the trees, sorry, the animals and the trees. The forest wants to make everything into a forest, whereas the trees want to keep everything as a prairie, so they've got enough to graze. And
Uh,
uh, and you know how, like, how deer, for example, they will rub their antlers on trees, taking the bark off and kill them. And if you
right.
plant a tree where there's lots of cows, they will take the rind off, and the tree dies, right? So it's but even with these tiny sheep, you can still see that dynamic a little bit.
Oh, well.
And the
Okay.
service trees, for example, they have a super magnet. I don't know what it is, but they're like they smell them from far away. I
So
really need to
the sheep
protect
are
those.
predators of weak trees, is what you're saying?
Yes, yes, very much so. And vines. Like if there are weak vines that don't have stakes, or God forbid, something in a growth tube, it's as
Oh
if the
yeah.
growth tube has has candy written on it or something like that.
Oh no.
It's
Oh, this
really
is
and they'll double up to get the growth tube off. There'll
oh
be
my
like two
God,
or three
okay.
of them, like trying to nudge it off.
That is hilarious. This is like I mean this is good to know. Good to know because I know this is how would you what do you do about that? I mean, do you just like how can you prevent that? Let's say you have a new orchard that you're starting or a new, a new vineyard orchard kind of thing, a new system where you're planting young trees significantly, but you need those sheep in to keep grazing. What do you how have you been handling it?
So we've been putting, sort of protection around the trees, and then just plenty of stakes and make sure that they're very, robust. And
Got it. So like
um,
something beyond the tube as well, like a little wire
y-
cage kind of thing.
sometimes a cage, but sometimes, if you put a growth tube and just sort of, have it tall enough, but then also have
Okay,
stakes that hold the tree in place.
got it. Okay,
Um, So yeah, we're sort of still experimenting with it, and I've lost a couple of trees, but nothing major.
nice. Um, yeah, the going back to the walnuts, they also so this is a Juglandaceae. It's apparently they actually release a chemical in the soil that sort of scours the soil and makes it in inhospitable for other plants so that they aren't competing with like their own children when their walnuts drop and seed. At least this is what I've heard. Does that have?
I think that is the leaves when the leaves fall. So
Oh, really? Okay.
I made sure
It's
that the walnuts they're not planted anywhere where we have a steep slope.
got it.
Like
Okay.
I had another parcel where I did think about placing walnuts, but that's too steep. So we need to be able to drive there,
Right.
and um, and yeah, so we backed off from that idea.
Do you have any problem in terms of the vineyard work that you have to do with labor? I mean, is there labor available? Like, are there people around that actually can do this work for you? Are you doing a lot of it yourself? It sounds like
Yeah.
it's a lot of hand work, I imagine.
It's a lot of handwork. I mean, there's two of us full time, and
Okay.
then in the summer I have maybe another six people helping us sort of with the lead work.
Okay.
But I'm actually quite optimistic we can reduce that a fair bit with this new system and with it. So there's one more thing that we're integrating now, which is we're integrating parts of fences into the vine row. So once the vines are 5 6 feet, 5 feet above the ground, you got plenty of space below that to place a fence.
Right.
So you don't then need to be running around with an electric fence for the sheep, which means that if you're grazing sort of to the sort of holistic grazing, I guess is what it's called, where you're grazing maybe for a week and then moving them once a week.
Right.
You just have sort of small pens. It becomes super quick and super easy.
Oh, you just open a gate and on to the next parcel.
Exactly. And then the second thing is because the canopy is now horizontal instead of vertical, it becomes super easy to spray with a drone because the drone is
Oh,
bringing the material from above, so it's
right.
hitting perpendicularly onto the horizontal canopy.
Right.
Whereas
Right.
opposed to normally when you have a vertical canopy, you need the spray to be horizontal to really penetrate everything.
Amazing. So have you
So
tried this?
we're actually sort of demechanizing the whole thing. And as we discussed earlier, that there's very little leaf pulling involved, so we're sort of minimizing the amount of leaf work that's needed. So I'm actually
Right.
quite optimistic I'll be able to cut a fair big chunk out of the whole effort.
Wow. Yeah, and then to the extent that anything gets too long and vigorous, I imagine it drapes down where the sheep can grab it, and that
Exactly.
they take care of that as well.
Exactly. And then I'll sell the tractor.
Sure you will.
I'm looking forward to that.
Well, you also, I mean, you're not afraid to employ technology. I mean, you were telling me about a UV system a robot that you're building as well to help with the mildew. And so you could have the drones above and then the robot beneath. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So there's there's research going on at Cornell and a couple of other universities where people are trying to use ultraviolet light.
Yes. Yeah.
I think the most of the thrust of the US research has been on powdery mildew,
Yeah, I think so.
but our problem is downy mildew.
Yeah.
But a very recent article that came out mentioned, sort of as a side note, that it seems to also induce systemic resistance against downy.
Oh, wow. So it trains the vines. It actually like sort of it has an epigenetic effect where the vines sort of respond by saying, "We're going to get tougher."
Yeah, I
Is
don't
that
know if
right?
it's epigenetic or if it's just sort of an irritation that causes the vine
Ah, gotcha.
to
Okay.
actually sort of put the
Right.
defenses on.
Like a callus or something.
Yes, in 2001 we were actually trying to do this. So, if you can sort of recall 2001, I mean, it's a mid COVID, and getting spare parts, spare electronic parts was really difficult. We had problems, so ultimately we had to bail on the robot, and then I re-kitted the ultraviolet lights that we have to fit them on the tractor, and then I designated 15 rows that I was going to run some experiments on. And 2021 was the wettest year since 87 years in Switzerland.
Wow.
So it's really a dreadful year. And in June, it rained like, I can't remember. We could never get a whole spraying round. We were
Right.
spraying every dry day, every dry window we were spraying, but we could never complete our round. So we were always just, going to where we left off last time. And after treating the vines with a UV light for, I think I did like 4 rounds, and then the field was just too wet. I couldn't drive it anymore.
Okay.
So it was a bit frustrating. Couldn't get a conclusive experiment. But um, my son is now studying electrical engineering, so I'm poking him a bit, and hopefully we'll have a working prototype to experiment again next summer.
So, and the photo that you sent me, it sort of looks like when we're talking about robots, maybe people think of sort of a anthropomorphized machine, but this is looks like a tanning bed on wheels. Is that a fair
A tanning
assessment?
bed. Yeah,
you know, have you
yeah. I
ever
guess
been
you
to
could say that.
I mean, it's there's like purple
Yeah,
tube lights.
it's a tanning bed, but it's on tracks.
Right, right.
So we have about a third of our slopes is too steep to drive.
Okay,
So I need something that's rugged enough to go up and down some steep slopes.
got it. And the so it's more like a tank track vehicle.
Yeah, yeah. And you know how sort of uh, organic crop production works is basically you don't have any single arrow in your quiver that's going to kill the fungus.
Right,
You need to sort of layer a number of different things.
right,
So imagine, so we've got the spray coming from above, and that could be, we use a number of different herbal teas as well to sort of try to limit the amount of copper we need to spray.
right, right,
So you got that coming from above, you got a light from coming below, and then also, um, there's some research that shows that sage tea or sage extract, it does work against downy quite well. But the problem is it's not rain fast.
right.
And my idea was to see if I could just grow enough sage that the etheric oils would just the whole vineyard would just smell from sage.
Oh yeah. I mean, the problem with that might be that your wine ends up smelling like sage.
Oh well, it's terroir.
True, true. No, I mean that's absolutely true. Yeah.
I mean, I like sage, so
Yeah, exactly. No, maybe it's not a problem. I know.
I mean, we do.
um,
There's also research showing that, for example, that thyme tea and peppermint tea
yes.
helps to keep
Thyme and what was the
the
other one?
peppermint
Peppermint. Yeah.
helps to keep the flies away. The Drosophila suzuki, the Japanese fly,
Okay.
the
Yeah.
vinegar fly, which has been a problem here. I guess you guys have had a problem with that as well. But so in my vineyards in the Italian speaking part, um, I've always been mowing by hand, and I've it's so boring if you mow everything. You just get brain dead if you do it trimming with a trimmer all day. So we started sort of doing selective mowing there, and we sort of leave all the beautiful flowers standing, and we leave all the wild thyme that was growing there. And in the time that I've had this vineyard, I think that the amount of thyme growing there is probably quadrupled easily.
Okay.
So in
Okay.
August and September, the vineyard really smells from thyme. It's actually really, really nice, and I don't have any problems with the flies down there.
Oh wow. That's lovely. Yeah, I've
And
heard that thyme is a sort of secret powerhouse of multiple things. Like so, yeah, insecticide or insect, repellent, but
yeah,
also, I mean, even some of the, an antifungal to a certain extent. But that might need to be more of an extraction. Sort of like what are some of the other ones like cinnamon bark or oak bark or yarrow. These are some of the things that are homeopathic antifungal things for powdery mildew, for example, or downy, possibly.
I mean all of
Um,
these aromatic herbs, also the sage, rosemary, and others, um, they do have antiseptic properties. So it's
right.
antifungal and antibacterial or extracts from them, and they are also very very high in antioxidants. And so
Yeah.
I'm guessing that it's sort of similar to like resveratrol, right? Like resveratrol is
Yeah.
one of the is a strong antioxidant that also is very antifungal.
Right.
So I'm wondering if it's sort of the same function that's going on there. But I was just thinking, because it's not rain fast, and because I was able to do this in my Italian speaking part, the vineyards down there, if I can give sort of an impulse into the vineyards by planting enough of the herbs, and then
Yeah.
somehow, and then the nice thing is that the sheep, they actually don't eat so much of the herbs. They eat all the grass around them, so they eat away the competition, and they only nibble at
Right.
the herbs.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So the herbs are going to get an advantage, and they'll be able to establish themselves. And yeah, so through that, I'm hoping that in time, I will have enough of an aromatic potential there
Now,
that it might help against the
are
fungus.
you are you concerned about having grumpy sheep if you have too many of those herbs that they don't like?
No, 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 no. So they have a very intelligent way of selecting what they eat. They're actually
Okay.
very, very intelligent with that. And it's just been shown that if they are allowed to graze on aromatic herbs, then they have much less problems with parasites.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, you can sort of easily imagine that a lamb that has been grazing on thyme all summer, it is going to taste very delicious.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well. It's already, I mean, I've heard, I mean, people do this intentionally, like with ducks, feed them only on pomegranate seeds, for example, to change the flavor, and or like with pigs, only allow them to fatten up on acorns
Yeah, but
for
that's a,
that
that's a big that's a
specific.
big mean if you sort of force them to. But this way
Yes, yeah,
you give them an opportunity to graze on a lot of different things,
right, exactly,
and
yeah.
then just through their own intuition, they will nibble on what they need and in the order of what they need, so that they end up being healthier.
Well, I mean, this does bring up a good question about the kind of, you have a very interconnected system which ultimately can become lower maintenance and lower input for you.
Yeah.
But it does require, a more layered, more complex form of knowledge, like a less reductive form of knowledge, and a more ecological view of things, the
Hmm.
interrelationship of all of these parts.
Yeah.
Is that something that's difficult to translate? Have you tried to train anybody and met with sort of resistance, or just stupefaction at trying to piece together the pieces that you've been living with for a while? Is that hard to pass
Uh,
on?
it's probably too early to start to pass on,
Okay. Yeah.
as I'm still sort of working through it, and to sort of for example seeing to what extent does a tree really help as a climbing aid, or do I maybe do I then cut down too much on airflow through the vineyard, or these are things I will need to
Right.
sort of experiment and see. Um, I can, however, say that most of my neighbors they regularly shake their heads when they walk past my vineyards, and when we
Yes.
speak, they
Yes.
always tell me, "Oh, we've tried this before. We've tried this before." But the thing is, they always try sort of just one at a time. And the key
Yeah.
here is really the interaction. It's the interaction between the inverted trellis, or a horizontal canopy, with the drone, with the sheep, with the herbs, with the trees. It's really the magic is really sort of when you put the thing together.
Yeah. It's funny. I seem to talk to a lot of people for whom the neighbors shake their heads at what you're doing. Drawn to you types, for some reason.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, but specifically, even just with the sheep, there's a bit of animal husbandry knowledge that you need to have. I mean, you're talking about parasites. Do you need to know about worming your sheep, or are you trying to build up resistance in your flock as well, that so that if they aren't resilient, they sort of get culled out naturally?
No, I've had to treat them once, but that was last year when we had super drought.
Okay.
So everything was we barely got rain for 2 months, and the grass between the vines was just brown, which is very very unusual for our part of the world. And then
Okay.
I ended up taking the sheep to a friend of mine that's 2 hours away, and he had plenty of green grass.
Oh,
So
nice.
they, so
And
they
but
kind of get to go on holiday for a month and a half. But otherwise, we're trying to move them rapidly enough so the parasites then tend to the cycle tends to be about 2 weeks, as far as I know. So
right,
that from the time that they drop the dung on the ground until it sort of the next generation starts to crawl up the grass, waiting to be eaten.
right,
So if you're moving them every week, then you sort of break the cycle every week,
right,
and that's
right.
what we're trying to
And
do.
you're also keeping them from eating the grass low enough to down to where those parasites are, right? So you're kind of, that the quick move is also preventing the cycle from, right, getting up there, but it's also, you're not letting them eat down to the ground where they're going to be eating up those parasites.
Yeah. So in that, like in last year when it was the super drought, then they were eating basically everything.
Right.
Um,
And
but but the thing is that the second generation will actually climb up the grass to try to reach the peak, so that it's more likely to be eaten.
got it. I see. So are you also using minerals, to, like, using the sheep to remineralize if you have any, you know I mean, this is, you're probably aware of this, but I don't know how many people who are wine interested in wine would know about this, because it's more, sheep oriented. But essentially, if you do a soil test and you find that, like, your soil is poor in certain nutrients, you can just put mineral boxes out for your sheep, and then they will naturally feed on the things that your soil is poor in, because they're not getting them from the plants that are growing, because the plants won't contain them, because soil doesn't contain them. And then as the sheep, use that mineral box to get their lacking minerals, they'll be pooping them back into the land, and over years the land will remineralize with the sheep doing that, and then eventually you'll have a balanced soil mineral profile, and the sheep won't need to be given supplements anymore. Is that something you've played around with at all?
I haven't heard of that or played around
Oh,
with it, but I have thought of feeding them seeds. Uh,
seeds.
like
Oh,
I was
yeah.
thinking of I like to bring
Let
in
them do your planting. Yeah.
exactly, and then the planting comes with a
Fertilizer.
fertilizer.
Oh,
So
that's yeah. That makes a
um,
lot of sense. Yeah.
and they like to So when we go check on them and just daily, we usually have a little bit for something for them to nibble on, so that they'll come running and then you see if somebody's limping or something's wrong or it's
Right,
coming
right.
right away. And also when we move them, we I just open the fences and I walk 500 meters across the field, and they all come with me.
Right.
So
Now,
it's good.
do you have to have sheepdogs that live with them to protect them?
No, no.
Oh, so it's
Um,
not a high predator area then.
we do have lynxes.
Okay.
Um,
But so far
uh, so
no
far, no
issues.
incident. I haven't heard of any incident in my area.
Okay.
Um, I've heard about somebody who had incident with a lynx, but so far I've been spared.
Okay. And the fencing that you're using, is it the sort of portable, the mesh electric solar powered,
That's what we're
or
using
how?
now. But what we're looking to implement is to put in sort of fixed parts of the fence into the vine row,
Right, right.
right below the vines.
And would
And
that
because the sheep are
be
so small, you only need sort of like 2 feet tall.
right,
You,
right?
you don't need
Just
taller
like a
than that.
single strand electric fence or something like that?
No, 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 not electric.
Oh,
Just a
just a
wire mesh. Just a wire
oh,
mesh.
just
No,
a
no
little, yeah.
electricity.
Okay, got it. Got it.
I've
Okay.
lost a few sheep. I haven't caught anybody in the action, but I think is that if somebody goes walking past with their dogs, that a dog goes and jumps in and thinks it's play, but then the sheep actually get caught in the electric fence and can't free themselves,
Uh,
and then they die from electrocution.
uh,
I've lost a few of them.
yeah.
That's been quite sad. So that's why I'm keen to get away from the electricity and just have fences that are just static and no electricity on them.
Right. Huh. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Nice. And you, I mean, I guess you already mentioned this, but you are growing vinifera, which is, it sounds like clones that are from Switzerland as well as some other, Chardonnay. You're growing. You've got an interesting thing with sour cherries and Chardonnay going on. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So we're primarily Pinot Noir producer, but we have like 5 different whites as well. We have a couple of other reds, and um, I guess it started with the vermouth we make. So when
Okay.
I started to branch outside of the vinifera only category.
Uh huh. Right.
So I made two vermouths, white and red, both just still wine with infused with local herbs from the vineyard,
Uh
and
huh.
no sugar and no spirits added. So just wine, herbs, and
Right.
super dry, super bitter.
Got it.
And then the latest white vermouth we're making now is a pet-nat.
Oh.
So it's a vermouth pet-nat that's coming out really nice. Because I realized I was always making sort of super simple cocktails
Uh
with the
huh.
vermouths, adding a sparkling or something to it. Hey,
Why
why don't
not
you just
just
make the bottle like that? So
exactly? Yeah.
the cherries, they are in our Chardonnay parcel now. I don't foresee mixing them, but we're gonna take the sour cherries and make wine from that.
Okay.
I also planted one ginkgo biloba tree into that vineyard.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm gonna make some experiment with sour cherry wine with ginkgo infusion, and then
Lovely.
the wine from my parcel down in the Italian-speaking part is a Merlot Cabernet Franc. So the 21 vintage is now Merlot Cabernet Franc thyme infusion.
Ah,
And the 22 is going to be Merlot Cabernet Franc, cherries, and thyme infusion because I have an old cherry tree down there.
gotcha.
So,
You
and
know,
that's, like I said, when I'm down there in August or September, it really smells so beautifully of thyme. Because of
yeah,
that, I thought it's really part of the terroir.
yeah,
And it's sort of a super mild infusion. So I think, like, if I didn't tell you about it, you may not even notice it.
okay. That's lovely. And
And
how are they being received by folks? How are these sort of vermouths?
the vermouths are super well received.
Okay,
Nothing else has been released. I was just we were doing a tasting down in Milan a week ago with a new pet-nat vermouth, and that was great. That was really great. Everybody was like, "What? What is this?
yeah,
You're
no, it's a
crazy!"
great idea. I
And like,
mean, you
no sugar, just dry, and sparkling. Super nice.
so it's what are the ingredients in that one?
There's a wormwood, yarrow,
Okay,
and hyssop. And these are
wormwood,
all
yarrow, and
things that
hyssop
just grow in our vineyards.
with which with which
It's just
grape?
it's a blanc de noir from pinot.
Okay, got it. Blanc de Noir.
And
Wow.
then, so I start the tank by sort of, placing herbs in the tanks, and then I fill it up with juice. And then once it starts to ferment, 3 4 days into it, I taste and also see if I need to add more bitterness or if I need to add anything more. You need to be sort of quite vigilant with, you know, you need to get your
Right.
herbs in the right quantities in before you need to bottle.
Right.
So you have
Enough,
really
but
a
not
short
too
amount of
much.
time. You really need to sort of be on top of it and tasting it daily, and
Right.
maybe adding something in or however one you work that.
Wow, that sounds really special. I mean, both because of the amount of, I think, work and care involved in that, but also just that blend sounds incredible. I mean, that's
It's just so aromatic, and then when the bubble somehow that if you put too much sulfites into a sparkling wine, it really stinks.
yeah.
It's sort of the same thing here, but it's not stinking. It's sort of these beautiful aromatics coming out.
Oh wow.
So it sort of
That's
enhances the aromatic feel of it without being too bitter. So because if you want to
uh-huh.
get sort of the aromatic feel from the wormwood, then you need to put enough in, and then it ends up getting too much into the bitter direction.
Right. Wild. That sounds incredible.
Yeah,
How can people try this?
we haven't released it yet. I want to start this one tasting.
They're gonna have to
I'm
make
waiting
it
for the labels.
themselves.
I'll have labels soon.
So it's a Blanc de Noir infused with wormwood, hyssop, and yarrow. That's
Yeah,
really, I
yeah.
mean, that's just inspiration right there. That's really cool. Um, wow. What other, I mean, what other wines are you making, or what other, approaches are you taking? What's your philosophy? I mean, it sounds like you said you're doing 0-0. You obviously trying to capture terroir in a real sense, in a real, like, inclusive sense of what everything that's growing
Yeah,
amongst there.
yeah.
What else you got going on?
Um, let's see. So the pears are they're called sheep pears here in Switzerland. They're sort of very
Sheep
tiny
pears.
pears, very aromatic.
Oh wow.
And then I got one parcel with a hawthorn, and the
Uh-huh.
goal there is to take the flowers from hawthorn and infuse them with the wine from that parcel. And the wine is it's a white variety called Kerner.
Okay.
We do all our wines whole cluster fermented, so all the whites, all the reds, everything is whole cluster, just
Okay.
foot tread.
Okay.
Um,
Now, hawthorn is truly one of the magical plants on the planet and can literally prevent you from needing bypass surgery on your heart. I don't
yeah,
know how many
yeah.
people are aware of this, but it's like super heart healthy plant. Do you know if the flowers contain that, or is it just the fruit of the hawthorn?
No, it's flowers, it's the leaves as well.
Yeah.
So we're going to
Fantastic.
experiment with both flowers and leaves separately, and then to see what sort of mix we end up with.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So that wine is sort of, should we say, heart healthy,
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
the cherries and ginkgo will be sort of brain healthy, if you will.
Brain healthy. Yeah. Oh, this sounds, my goodness. My goodness. I'm excited. Um,
And it's sort of we're working biodynamically. So if you read through the lectures from Steiner, I mean his goal was really to make foodstuffs or be medicine.
hmm
So
Right.
it's sort of trying to be true to that ideal.
Right. What do they say? Like forks, not knives kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Like, um, yeah. Well, that's great. Now I did go to your website. Do you want to say what your website is, or is there a better way for people to sort of find out what you're to follow along to maybe, you know, come visit you if they can, or get
yeah,
in contact with any questions or anything like that?
yeah. So it's hawksonwine.com
And that is
or
Haukasson.
yeah,
And it's wines or wine?
wine.
Wine,
Yeah,
singular.
singular.
Got it.
I'm also on
And
Instagram, but I'm not posting a lot. But it's possible
got
to
it.
reach me there if somebody wants
Oh,
is in
and
the area.
we should say it's Haukasson, Wine.
Yes,
Right? Do you
that's
also own the .com, like the WINE.com, or is it WEINE.ch only?
so I've got both. So
Okay,
there's one
got
in
it. Good.
German, and then wine is written in German,
Uh-huh.
.ch, and then there's one
Uh-huh.
in English, which is wine written in English.com.
Okay. Good. So people don't have to, if they are English speakers, don't have to remember how to spell it in German.
Yeah, they won't get much
Okay.
benefit from the German speaking side.
Great. Now, have you are you are using some of your trees for trellising, for actually like draping vines in, or you're in the process of making this happen. Have you
Yeah,
noticed anything from that, like in terms of different vine behavior once they know that they're in a tree versus on a trellis?
I haven't, but a colleague of
Okay.
mine, and from the Italian speaking part, actually, his name is Tancred Gutch. And I think actually his father was mentioned on your podcast a few episodes back. His name is Ernst Gutch, and he is a pioneer in terms of agroforestry in South America. I think the person
Oh,
you were
okay.
interviewing was studying with him.
Okay.
So, well, he has a number of trees in his vineyards and lets the vines climb on them. And he observes that the vine leaf that's inside the tree canopy tends to be healthier than the vine leaf that's outside.
Huh. You
And
would think
also,
the
also
complete
I was
opposite.
visiting him 2 years ago, and then we stopped by an old vineyard that sort of barely being used anymore. 80% of the vines were already dead, but there was still 20% of the vines were still there. And then we're standing above this vineyard, and he says, "So look around. Do you notice where are the vines that are still alive?" And you start looking at them; they're actually all around where there are trees,
Huh.
and all the other vines were dead.
Right. That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, it's sort of. I mean, that was also a big motivation for me to start sort of going down this rabbit hole of trying to think of, okay, so how do we make the vines more healthy? How do we get more like a forest floor into the vineyards?
Yeah, that's exciting. Well, do you have any closing thoughts, or any is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to cover?
No, I think we covered it pretty much.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all this. I mean, this is just candy for me, and I'm hoping to excite some other folks about these topics and the things that you're doing, the things I'm interested in terms of this vitiforestry, silvo combination of all kinds of things, polyculture essentially. So thank you for sharing all this. Really, I'm glad you got in touch, and I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing. Thank you.
I mean, it's sort of outside it's sort of in a part of the parameter space that really hasn't been explored much. So
Yeah,
it'll be very
at least
interesting to
not
see in terms
recently,
of
right?
vine health and what impact it will have.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it seems like the last time it was practiced was before, when it was practiced because it was just necessary. It was the only option,
Yeah,
and now it would be interested to see if we could, get some data, like you're saying, on and how it impacts vine health and things like that, and wine quality, wine flavor.
yeah.
Because I do feel like, yeah, like you, that it's gotta have an impact, and I predict a beneficial one, but that's me.
I'm sure I'll find customers for it. I would like it for sure. It's my baby,
well,
so
well, great. Thank you again.
sure. Thanks.
Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. And if you did and would like to support this podcast, please do. There is a Patreon link in the show notes where you can subscribe with a monthly, very low subscription to add monetary support. Or please subscribe on your feed, wherever you listen to this podcast. Subscribe and follow this podcast so that you will automatically download it when each new episode comes out. That's one of the few metrics that we can measure to see the support and listenership of this. And otherwise, if you're already listening, subscribe, supporting, whatever, just a long-time listener, haven't done anything, please do a review. If you would, any positive review with 5 stars and a nice word is fantastic and helpful, and really improves the algorithmic performance of this podcast. So thank you so much.